The eternal assembly of enlightened species had been running the galaxy for approximately 7,000 standard cycles, which was roughly equivalent to being the universe's most successful homeowners association. They had rules for everything: which star systems could develop FTL technology, theirs; which species deserved representation in galactic affairs, also theirs; and which civilizations required guidance to reach their full potential, everyone else naturally. The Assembly's headquarters floated majestically in the Nexus sector, a crystalline megastructure that housed representatives from 43 species, who had achieved what they modestly called true enlightenment. This enlightenment, as it happened, coincided remarkably well with the development of weapons capable of sterilizing entire planets. But the Assembly preferred to think of themselves as educators rather than exterminators. High Overseer Valdris of the Cathani Collective adjusted his ceremonial neural crown and gazed upon the holographic display showing the galaxy's newest discovery. The third planet of an unremarkable yellow star had recently been catalogued by their deep space survey drones, and the initial reports were frankly amusing. Bipedal mammals, announced Senior Analyst Thexara, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence to indicate mild interest. The Thexaran species had perfected dismissive bureaucracy roughly 3 millennia ago. Carbon-based, oxygen-breathing. They've achieved basic metallurgy and rudimentary chemical propulsion. Estimated development level, pre-contact stage 2. A ripple of what passed for laughter among the assembled delegates echoed through the chamber. Pre-contact stage 2 was the galactic equivalent of academic probation. Species that had discovered fire but hadn't yet figured out that the universe was much larger and considerably more hostile than their tiny mud ball suggested. "How charmingly primitive," remarked Executor Nemeth of the Void Touched, his translucent form shimmering with what might have been amusement or hunger. The Void Touched had transcended physical form roughly 2,000 years ago, which made them insufferably smug at dinner party. "Do they still engage in territorial disputes over imaginary lines?" "Oh yes," Thexara confirmed, manipulating the hologram to show various conflict zones dotting the planet's surface. They appear to have divided their single landmass into competing nation-states. Current scan indicates approximately 200 separate governmental entities, most of which seem to exist primarily to disagree with their neighbors. This generated genuine mirth among the Assembly. The concept of multiple governments on a single world was considered either adorably naive or clinically insane, depending on one's perspective on political theory. High Overseer Valdris stroked his mandibles thoughtfully. The Cathani had been the galaxy's self-appointed peacekeepers for the last 4 millennia, a role they'd assumed after their previous occupation as the galaxy's most efficient conquerors had become socially unfashionable. "Have they detected our survey probes?" "Negative. Their most advanced detection systems operate on primitive electromagnetic principles. Our stealth technology is approximately 700 years more advanced than their most optimistic theoretical framework." The Assembly's newest member, Ambassador Hylock of the recently contacted Dreven Republic, leaned forward with the enthusiasm of someone still trying to make a good impression. "Perhaps we should simply integrate them into the greater galactic community. Standard first contact protocols suggest." The chamber fell silent. Several delegates exchanged glances that, across dozens of species, universally conveyed the same sentiment. "Oh, you sweet naive child." "Ambassador," Valdris said gently, "the standard protocols assume a species has achieved certain prerequisites: unified planetary government, post-scarcity economics, the wisdom to recognize their betters when they encounter them." He gestured at the hologram, where several bright dots indicated active military conflicts. "These creatures are still fighting over resources their planet produces in abundance. They lack the sophistication for true membership," added Executor Nemeth. "However, they may possess utility. Their biological diversity might prove valuable for our research initiatives." Thexara highlighted several data clusters. "Preliminary biological scans indicate remarkable adaptability. They've successfully colonized diverse environmental zones and demonstrate unusual resilience to physical trauma. Their reproductive rate suggests rapid population recovery from localized conflict." "Excellent livestock characteristics," observed Warsinger Gex of the Mandalorian-inspired Gexi clans, his battle-scarred carapace gleaming under the chamber's artificial sun. The Gexi had joined the Assembly after their homeworld had been accidentally destroyed during a particularly spirited disagreement about mining rights. They might serve well as auxiliary forces. High Overseer Valdris considered that the assembly had been dealing with an uptick in piracy along the Outer Rim, and their own forces were stretched maintaining order across 47 systems. A client species with good breeding rates and natural aggression could prove useful, provided they were properly managed. I propose a standard integration protocol, Valdris announced. A demonstration fleet to establish contact, followed by systematic education in galactic realities. Once they understand their place in the greater cosmic order, they can be properly utilized. The vote was unanimous, which was hardly surprising since the Assembly had designed their voting procedures to ensure unanimous results. Dissent was considered poor form and terrible for morale. Within 3 cycles, the educational fleet was assembled. 12 heavy cruisers, 47 support vessels, and approximately 15,000 personnel representing the finest military and diplomatic minds the Assembly had to offer. It was, by any reasonable standard, massive overkill for a species that had only recently discovered how to split atoms. But the Assembly had learned through 7,000 years of galactic management that overwhelming force prevented misunderstanding. Better to arrive with too much firepower and not need it, than to arrive with too little and face the embarrassment of having to call for reinforcement. As the fleet engaged their displacement drives and vanished into the swirling corridors of hyperspace, High Overseer Valdris felt the satisfaction of another problem neatly addressed. By the time they returned, the Assembly would have another client species. The galaxy would be slightly more organized, and the universe would continue its orderly progression toward total enlightenment. The fact that none of them had bothered to study exactly why this particular species had survived and thrived in such a competitive environment was, in retrospect, a rather significant oversight. The educational fleet dropped out of hyperspace with all the subtlety of a cosmic anvil falling through a cathedral window. 12 heavy cruisers materialized in Earth's outer solar system, their hulls gleaming with the sort of technological superiority that usually made primitive species immediately surrender and beg for mercy. Fleet Commander Zethvar of the Cathani expected the usual response. Panicked transmissions, desperate attempts at communication, followed by the inevitable capitulation once the locals realized they were hopelessly outmatched. He had overseen 17 such educational encounters during his career, and they all followed the same predictable pattern. Earth, however, had apparently missed the memo about predictable pattern. The first indication that something was amiss came when the planet's primitive detection systems completely failed to notice them. This was expected. What wasn't expected was the complete radio silence that followed their standard greeting broadcast. Perhaps their communication technology is more limited than anticipated, suggested Navigation Officer Ixtedal, her sensor stalks twitching with uncertainty. Commander Zethvar authorized a closer approach. The fleet moved to high orbit, positioning themselves in an impressive formation designed to inspire appropriate awe and terror. Still nothing. No panicked broadcasts. No desperate attempts at negotiation. No signs that the planet's inhabitants had even noticed the arrival of galactic civilization. Send a reconnaissance probe to the largest population center, Zethvar ordered. Standard first contact protocol. Visual demonstration of our capabilities should prompt a response. The probe descended toward what their scans indicated was a major urban center. New York City had seen many things in its history, but a basketball-sized alien reconnaissance device performing aerial maneuvers over Manhattan was admittedly a first. What happened next would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy as either a masterpiece of rapid tactical adaptation or a textbook example of how primitive species completely ignored established first contact protocol. The probe lasted approximately 47 minutes before something shot it down. Commander, reported Tactical Officer Vexerin, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid sequence to indicate confusion. The probe has been neutralized. By what? Surface-to-air missile. We accounted for their primitive chemical propulsion systems. Negative, sir. Analysis of the final transmission suggests a kinetic projectile, metallic, approximately 12 millimeters in diameter. The bridge fell silent. Someone had shot down an advanced reconnaissance probe with what appeared to be a bullet. Impossible, Zethvar muttered. Run the analysis again. While his crew rechecked their impossible data, 3,000 kilometers below, General Patricia Hayes of the United States Air Force, was having what she would later describe as the most interesting morning of her career. The phone in her Pentagon office hadn't stopped ringing since NORAD had detected what appeared to be 12 large objects that had simply materialized in Earth's orbital space. "Ma'am," reported Colonel David Hoffman from the other end of a very secure line, "we have confirmation. Whatever's up there, it's not ours, it's not the Russians, and it's definitely not natural phenomena. Any communication attempts? They broadcast something on multiple frequencies about 20 minutes ago. The eggheads at NSA are calling it a structured signal, but it's like nothing in our databases." Hayes rubbed her temples. In her 30-year military career, she had planned for nuclear war, terrorist attacks, and natural disasters. Alien invasion had been notably absent from the Pentagon's contingency planning, though she was beginning to think that might have been an oversight. What's the response from the other major powers? Everyone's trying to reach out through back channel. The Chinese claim they shot down some kind of probe over Beijing. The Russians are being typically Russian about the whole thing. The Europeans are calling for an emergency UN session. Before Hayes could respond, her secure line lit up with another call. This one had the sort of priority coding that usually meant someone very important was about to ruin her day. "General Hayes," came the familiar voice of Secretary of Defense William Chen. "I need you to coordinate with Dr. Elena Vasquez at DARPA. Immediately. We have a situation." "Sir, if you're referring to the objects in orbit, I'm referring to the probe wreckage we just recovered from Central Park. Elena's people have been going over it for the last 2 hours. According to her preliminary analysis, we're looking at technology that's anywhere from 50 to 500 years ahead of our current capabilities." Hayes felt a familiar sensation in her stomach that she associated with very bad news delivered very calmly. However, Chen continued, "And this is the interesting part. It's not magic. The principles are sound. The engineering is advanced but comprehensible. And according to Elena, some of the components can be replicated with current manufacturing techniques." 8 hours later, Elena Vasquez was addressing a room full of people who 12 hours earlier had been primarily concerned with conventional military threats. Now they were staring at what appeared to be alien technology spread across several examination tables. "The power source is some kind of miniaturized fusion cell," she explained, pointing to a device roughly the size of a smartphone battery. "The propulsion system uses magnetic field manipulation for atmospheric flight. The communication array operates on quantum entanglement principles we've been theorizing about for decades." General Hayes leaned forward. "Bottom line, Doctor. Can we understand it? We can more than understand it, General. We can improve it." This statement would later be recognized as the moment humanity collectively decided that being conquered was significantly less interesting than reverse engineering their would-be conqueror's technology. Meanwhile, in orbit, Fleet Commander Zethvar was discovering that educational encounters could occasionally educate both sides. His second reconnaissance probe had been destroyed by what appeared to be a coordinated missile strike. His third probe had simply vanished, leaving behind trace radiation signatures that suggested the locals had somehow developed localized electromagnetic pulse weapons in the span of 6 hours. "Commander," reported his increasingly agitated tactical officer, "we're detecting massive increases in electromagnetic activity across the planet's surface. Communication traffic has increased by 3,000%. Multiple launch signatures from various continental locations. Military response: unknown, sir. The launches appear to be orbital insertion attempts, but the payloads are too small to be weapons platform." What the tactical officer was observing was humanity's greatest strength, and the one characteristic the Assembly's surveys had completely failed to identify. When presented with a new problem, humans didn't panic, negotiate, or surrender. They got to work. The Assembly's response to the educational fleet's initial reports could be described as mildly concerned, which in galactic diplomatic terms roughly translated to someone was about to have a very bad millennium. High Overseer Valdris had convened an emergency session after receiving Fleet Commander Zethvar's increasingly bewildered status updates. "Let me understand this correctly. Valdris said, his neural crown flickering with patterns that indicated deep concentration or possibly a migraine. A pre-contact stage 2 species has not only failed to surrender upon witnessing our superior technology, but has actually begun studying it. That is correct, High Overseer, came Zethvar's voice through the quantum entanglement communicator. They appear to have established orbital installations using principles derived from our probe technology in less than 72 standard hours. The assembled delegates exchanged glances that universally conveyed variations of "this is highly irregular," and "someone's probably about to get demoted." Senior analyst Thexar manipulated her datapad with increasing agitation. This contradicts all established first contact models. Species at their development level should lack the industrial capacity for rapid technological integration. Perhaps, suggested Executor Numith, his translucent form rippling with what might have been amusement, they are simply more resourceful than anticipated. High Overseer Valdris made a decision that would later be studied as either a masterpiece of decisive leadership or a catastrophic failure of risk assessment. Dispatch the correction fleet. If the educational approach has proven insufficient, we shall proceed to enforcement protocol. The correction fleet was the Assembly's answer to those awkward situations when species failed to appreciate the benefits of galactic civilization. It consisted of 36 heavy battle cruisers, 150 support vessels, and approximately 50,000 military personnel who specialized in explaining the benefits of compliance through practical demonstration. Fleet Admiral Karethtin of the Void Touched had overseen 43 enforcement actions during his career. He approached the human problem with the sort of professional confidence that came from never having encountered a species that didn't immediately recognize the futility of resistance. This confidence lasted approximately 6 hours after arriving in the Sol system. "Admiral," reported his tactical coordinator, "we're detecting approximately 200 artificial objects in various orbital positions around the third planet. Energy signatures are unusual. Defensive platforms. Unknown, sir. The power output suggests weapons capability, but the configurations don't match any known military architecture." What Admiral Karethtin was observing was the result of humanity's most dangerous characteristic: their absolute refusal to accept that anything was impossible if you approached it with sufficient creativity and complete treasury for conventional wisdom. Elena Vasquez's team had spent the last week in what could generously be called accelerated research mode, and more accurately described as caffeinated hysteria. Working with reverse-engineered alien technology and a complete absence of preconceived notions about what was supposed to be possible, they had achieved what the Assembly would have considered several minor miracles. "The magnetic field manipulation technology scales beautifully," she explained to General Hayes over a secure video link. "We've essentially turned every piece of orbital debris larger than a softball into a potential kinetic weapon. The fusion power cells can be manufactured using modified semiconductor fabrication techniques, and the quantum communication arrays—" "Doctor," Hayes interrupted, "in simple terms, please, I need to brief the President in 20 minutes. We've turned Earth's orbital space into the galaxy's most unpleasant surprise party." Meanwhile, Fleet Admiral Karethtin was discovering that enforcement actions could occasionally become significantly more complicated than advertised. His attempt to establish a communications blockade around Earth had resulted in the mysterious disappearance of 6 reconnaissance ships. Not destroyed, disappeared. His long-range sensors showed them simply vanishing from detection as if they had never existed. "Admiral," his tactical coordinator reported with the sort of careful neutrality that indicated very bad news delivered professionally. "We've lost contact with the advance patrol. Enemy action, unknown." The patrol reported approaching what appeared to be a standard orbital station, then nothing. No distress signals, no wreckage, no trace emissions. What the patrol had encountered was Orbital Defense Platform 7. Which looked like a standard orbital station right up until the moment it wasn't. Vasquez's team had discovered that the aliens' cloaking technology worked both ways. If you could make something invisible, you could also make something look like something else entirely. The orbital station had actually been a modified asteroid, hollowed out and packed with enough kinetic kill vehicles to reduce a small moon to constituent atom. The alien patrol had approached for standard inspection and found themselves in the middle of what humans cheerfully referred to as a murder sphere. "We need to establish direct communication," Admiral Karethtin decided. Broadcast standard surrender demands on all frequencies. Make it clear that continued resistance will result in planetary sterilization protocols. The message that Earth received was in essence a formal invitation to give up immediately or face the consequence. The response they sent back would later become required study material in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. It consisted of a single human phrase, translated into 43 different languages. Come and take. The phrase was accompanied by detailed technical schematics of the aliens' own weapons systems, improved versions of their shield technology, and what appeared to be blueprints for a faster-than-light drive that operated on principles the assembly's best engineers didn't recognize. They proved our technology. Admiral Karethtin stared at the data streams in something approaching disbelief. Substantially, sir. The shield modifications increase efficiency by 37%. The weapons improve. His tactical coordinator paused. Sir, if these specifications are accurate, they've essentially turned our own plasma cannons into something that could threaten our capital ships. The Admiral found himself in the uncomfortable position of facing an enemy that had not only refused to surrender, but had apparently spent their time since first contact upgrading their opposition's equipment for them. How is this possible? He demanded. They're a primitive species. They barely have chemical rockets. His science officer, a young Thexeran named Peltix, who had recently graduated from the academy with honors in xenological studies, cleared his throat nervously. Sir, I've been reviewing their planetary data. I think we may have misunderstood something fundamental about their development pattern. Explain. They don't just have chemical rockets. They have approximately 8,000 different ways to make things explode, 17 different methods of achieving flight, and their planetary communication network processes more information in a single day than our entire fleet generates in a standard cycle. Admiral Karethtin felt the first stirrings of what would later develop into a profound career change. Are you suggesting they're not primitive? I'm suggesting, sir, that they might be the most aggressively innovative species the galaxy has ever encountered. Their entire civilization appears to be based on the principle that any problem can be solved by thinking about it differently and then making it explode. As if to emphasize this point, Admiral Karethtin's flagship was suddenly surrounded by what appeared to be empty space that had somehow learned to shoot back. Earth's defenders had discovered that space-based warfare was significantly more interesting when you abandoned the assumption that weapons had to be visible. The correction fleet found itself in the highly irregular position of fighting an enemy they couldn't see, using weapons they had inadvertently provided, against a species that apparently considered interstellar warfare a learning experience. High Overseer Valdris's next communication from the fleet was considerably shorter than his previous updates. Request immediate reinforcements. All available assets. Situation has become education. The Assembly's decision to deploy the Grand Armada was made with the sort of unanimous enthusiasm typically reserved for tax increases and root canal surgery. Nobody particularly wanted to commit the galaxy's entire military force to what had started as a simple educational encounter. But the alternative, admitting that a pre-contact Stage 2 species had successfully resisted galactic civilization, was simply unthinkable. High Overseer Valdris stood before the assembled representatives, his neural crown flickering with patterns that indicated either deep wisdom or a complete nervous breakdown. The Grand Armada represents the combined military might of 43 civilized species, 600 capital ships, 2,000 support vessels, and the finest military minds the galaxy has produced over 7 millennia of enlightened warfare. The fleet that assembled at the Nexus staging area was genuinely impressive by any reasonable standard. It was also, according to several independent military analysts, complete and utter overkill for dealing with a single planetary system populated by chemical rocket-wielding mammals. Fleet Supreme Commander Yethlus of the Kithani had been chosen to lead the Armada based on her distinguished record of never having lost a single engagement in 4 centuries of military service. She approached the human problem with the methodical precision of someone who had reduced the art of interstellar warfare to a series of well-tested procedures. Her first mistake was assuming that humans would continue following the same tactical patterns they had demonstrated against the smaller fleets. Her second mistake was not studying exactly what humans had been doing during the 6 standard cycles it had taken to assemble the Grand Armada. Elena Vasquez had not been idle during this period. Working with what was now being called the Emergency Innovation Protocol, she had assembled a research team that included physicists, engineers, science fiction writers, and a surprisingly large number of people whose primary qualification was really good at making things work when they probably shouldn't. The aliens have been using the same technological base for millennia, she explained to an assembly of world leaders via secure quantum communication link. They've refined it, improved it, but they haven't fundamentally changed their approach to physics in thousands of years. They think in terms of incremental advancement. President Martinez leaned forward. And humans think in terms of what if we tried something completely insane and see what happens. The Grand Armada's arrival in the Sol system was accompanied by the sort of impressive light show that usually made primitive species immediately surrender and beg for mercy. Fleet Supreme Commander Yethlus had positioned her forces in a perfect sphere around Earth, with overlapping fields of fire that could theoretically sterilize the planet's surface 17 times over. Broadcast surrender demands, she ordered. Standard enforcement protocol. They have 1 standard hour to respond. The response came in approximately 37 minutes, and it wasn't exactly what the Grand Armada had been expecting. Every single ship in the Armada simultaneously lost primary power. What just happened? Commander Yethlus demanded as emergency lighting flickered on across her flagship's bridge. Unknown, ma'am, her tactical officer reported with the sort of professional calm that indicated mild panic being suppressed through military training. All fusion reactors across the fleet have simply stopped. No damage, no interference, they just aren't producing power anymore. What the Grand Armada had encountered was the result of Dr. Vasquez's most ambitious project, a device she had cheerfully nicknamed the Physics Correction Engine. Based on principles derived from alien technology and improved through what could only be described as reckless experimentation, it had the ability to temporarily modify the fundamental constants of physics in a localized area. We can't actually change the laws of physics, she had explained to increasingly concerned military officials, but we can change how they apply in specific circumstances. For instance, we can make it so fusion reactions require approximately 17% more energy to sustain themselves, just enough to shut down alien reactor designs without affecting human technology. The Grand Armada found itself drifting powerless in space, their crews working frantically to restart systems that had been designed to be absolutely foolproof. Auxiliary power is not responding, came reports from across the fleet. Backup reactors are non-functional. Emergency protocols are, ma'am, nothing is working. Commander Yethlus was experiencing what military historians would later recognize as the exact moment when the galaxy's understanding of warfare fundamentally changed. How is this possible? Her science officer, Ethexerin, who had spent the last several cycles studying every scrap of intelligence about human capabilities, cleared his throat nervously. Ma'am, I believe they have developed the ability to modify local space-time physics. The bridge fell silent. In 43 species worth of galactic history, no one had ever developed that particular capability, largely because it was considered impossible by every known school of theoretical physics. That's impossible, Commander Yethlus stated with the authority of someone whose entire worldview was currently crumbling. Yes, ma'am, I've informed the humans of this fact. They appear to be proceeding anyway. At that moment, every ship in the Grand Armada received a simultaneous communication on what appeared to be impossible to jam quantum frequencies. The message was brief, direct, and delivered in the sort of polite tone usually reserved for customer service representatives. Attention Galactic Assembly Forces. You are currently experiencing a temporary modification to local physics, designed to demonstrate that your technological superiority is entirely dependent on assumptions about how the universe works. These assumptions are incorrect. Please prepare to receive boarding parties for formal surrender negotiations. Boarding parties. Commander Yethlus stared at her communication officer. They can't possibly have ships capable of reaching us. She was technically correct.
Humans didn't have shit. What they had was something Dr. Vasquez's team had developed after asking the important question. If you can modify physics locally, do you really need ships? The answer, as it turned out, was no. What you needed was the ability to create localized space-time distortions that allowed small teams to essentially walk between star systems. The fact that this violated approximately 14 major principles of established physics was, according to the human research team, someone else's problem. Within 2 standard hours, the Grand Armada, the greatest military force the galaxy had ever assembled, formally surrendered to boarding parties, armed with what appeared to be modified mining equipment, and a cheerful disregard for everything the universe had previously considered possible. The negotiation session that followed would later be studied in diplomatic academies as either a masterpiece of practical statesmanship or a textbook example of how to completely rewrite the rules of interstellar relations. General Hayes, representing Earth's unified military command, sat across from High Overseer Valdris in what had previously been the Assembly's most secure conference facility and was now technically human territory. "Your turn," Valdris asked with the resigned dignity of someone whose 7,000-year-old civilization had just been educational encountered by a species that had discovered agriculture approximately 10 minutes ago in galactic terms. "Simple," Hayes replied. "The Assembly withdraws all claims to human territory. Earth is recognized as a sovereign system, with full rights to technological development and territorial expansion. All human prisoners and seized materials are returned immediately." And Hayes smiled with the sort of pleasant expression that made career diplomats instinctively reach for emergency communication devices. "We don't show the rest of the galaxy how to build physics correction engine." The silence that followed this statement was the sound of galactic civilization, collectively reconsidering its assumptions about technological development, military superiority, and the general wisdom of bothering species that treated the impossible as a starting point for innovation. High Overseer Valdris signed the treaty with the sort of dignified resignation usually reserved for signing one's own death warrant. The document that emerged would become the foundation for what historians later called the New Galactic Order, a remarkably polite arrangement in which 43 advanced species agreed that humans were probably best left to their own devices. The Assembly's educational fleet limped home to explain to their respective governments that they had discovered a species that considered galactic warfare an interesting learning experience, and had responded by essentially rewriting the laws of physics to suit their tactical requirements. The galaxy, for the first time in 7,000 years, found itself dealing with a species that was genuinely more dangerous than it was civilized. And as Dr. Elena Vasquez noted in her final report to the United Earth Defense Council, the truly terrifying thing wasn't what humans had accomplished, it was that they had barely gotten started. The first war with aliens had lasted approximately 6 months. The galaxy's collective decision to avoid a second war had taken roughly 6 minutes of careful consideration about whether they really wanted to find out what humans could accomplish when they had more time to prepare. As it turned out, the most effective way to ensure lasting peace was to demonstrate that war with humans was less a military conflict and more an educational experience that nobody particularly wanted to repeat.